we have a lot to cover, so I think I'll forge ahead. And for people who are just joining, my name is Lori Foley, and I coordinate the Heritage Emergency National Task Force. And if you haven't already, please put your name and affiliation in the chat box, as well as a brief statement what you hope to get out of this webinar. So helping me today behind the scenes is our tech guru, Nana Kaneko, who is the HENTF specialist and works with me at FEMA headquarters. As you probably know from getting beamed in, this meeting is being recorded, and I would like to ask that you keep your microphone muted. Again, put your name in the chat box and your affiliation. And I think we will probably see who we have here from private nonprofits, and maybe ask, let me go through the chat and see. What I think we'll do is see whether we can field those questions as we go forward. So this webinar is being convened at the request of the Vermont Arts and Culture Disaster and Resilience Network, VACDaRN, which has been fielding questions from you, cultural institutions and cultural stewards, about the public assistance process. Questions that include why applying to the SBA is necessary, and what that entails. So today's webinar will, I hope, answer many of your questions. And if your specific question is not answered, I hope you'll be able to find the person, you'll be able to be directed to where you can get your question or questions answered. On behalf of the entire federal family here up in Vermont, please know that our aim is to help you access federal disaster aid. We want to get you in the door. As cultural stewards know very, very well, funding for cultural institutions and arts organizations is a challenge in the best of times. Following a disaster, you're having to address multiple competing demands. Reopening to the public to provide your normal services, repairing structural damage, treating damaged collection items, and finding funding to do all of the above. So we have a packed agenda today, and we will get through it all. So after a brief introduction by me, which you just heard, an introduction of our speakers, we'll learn a little bit about who has joined this webinar, a slide about the Heritage Emergency National Task Force for those of you who've never heard of it before, followed by a brief introduction to public assistance by Tim Baker, which will then segue into the discussion about how disaster assistance works through the Small Business Administration from Carl Dombeck. Then we'll circle back to Tim Baker to talk about disaster assistance through FEMA's public assistance program, followed by Q&A. So if you have questions as this program goes on, please enter them in the chat box, and Nana will be monitoring those, and we will be able to circle back to those. And some of those questions might be answered as the webinar continues, but we will be circling back to all those questions to make sure you get the answers that you want. So with that, let's move on. All right, so you already know me. Tim, from wherever you are in Vermont, why don't you say a few words about yourself? Tim, are you there? All right, we'll circle back to you, Tim, when you can pull over by this side of the road. Oh, here you are. Go ahead.
Apologies, folks. Coming to you live from the back of my rental vehicle as I'm finishing up a site visit here at Ludlow Wastewater Treatment Plant. So thank you for putting up with this aspect of me having to do it this kind of remote. I do believe I have enough of a signal that I can stay with you throughout the entire presentation. Yes, as Lori said, my name is Timothy Baker. I am the PA Infrastructure Branch Director working the disaster 4720 in Vermont from the July flooding. So we will we're the ones that will be evaluating the PNPs, bringing them in for eligibility, and then looking at the eligibility of the disasters that the damages they want to try to claim because of the disaster. And we'll get into more of that later on in the presentation. So good afternoon. Nice to meet you all.
Thanks, Tim. You're coming in loud and clear, so don't move. Next, Carl Dombeck.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Carl Dombeck. I'm a public affairs specialist with the U.S. Small Business Administration. I am coming to you from White River Junction, so we are scattered all about this wonderful state of Vermont, and we'll be talking about how it's necessary to apply for an SBA disaster loan as part of the process and how that process meshes with FEMA's process. So between Timothy and I, hopefully we'll be able to give you a good overview and encourage you to get the process started if you need our help.
Great, thank you, Carl. And next, Ben Rose, who most of you, I hope, are familiar with already.
Hello, everyone. Ben Rose from the Vermont Division of Emergency Management, here at the FEMA Joint Field Office as State Alternate Coordinating Officer and Recovery Unit Leader during the SEOC activation. And looking forward to helping learning with you about this dance between FEMA and Small Business Administration for nonprofits. And I will note that as of right now, I'm only seeing, I think, 5 non-federal agencies represented: Vermont Studio Center, Middlebury College, Vermont Granite Museum, Vermont Department of Libraries, and Vermont Arts Council. So I'm hoping there are others arriving.
I hope so. I hope so too. We'll keep the lines open, that's for sure. Okay. Thank you, Ben.
And it is being recorded, so there's that.
Yes, this program is being recorded, and we will have make access available to everyone who is on this call, as well as who aren't able to attend this call. So you will be privy to this important information and can reprise this. Next, I'd like to introduce, whom I hope you all know, Rachel Onuf of the Vermont Arts and Culture Disaster and Resilience Network. So take it away, Rachel.
Thank you, Lori, and good afternoon, everyone, especially shouting out to those arts and cultural organizations who've taken the time to join us this afternoon. The VACDaRN started in May of 2019. Co-leads with are the Vermont Historical Records Program based at the State Archives, and that's where I sit, and the Vermont Arts Council. And Amy, it's wonderful to see you on this call today. We also have an amazing steering committee that really helped us mobilize when in the aftermath of the flooding in July. So we were able to both very quickly, following the lead of Vermont Libraries, which is one of our steering committee members, reach out to organizations to find out about damage and potential impacts to both buildings and collections. We've also worked closely with Laura Trashman, our Historic and Cultural Restoration Task Force lead. She's the State Historic Preservation Officer. So while VACDaRN is particularly focused on assisting those organizations that had impacted collections material, and we were able to successfully connect those orgs with people with emergency salvage, triage, and expertise in emergency triage and salvage work, we had them on site, and we're able to help support their efforts and have materials in freezers right now, and are talking to vendors to get estimates and kind of supporting them through that longer recovery process after the immediate stabilization. VACDaRN is also working actively to identify potential sources of funding and connect those affected organizations with those potential funders. I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for doing this today, all of you folks.
Great, thank you, Rachel. I'm looking for my microphone. All right, so before we get farther into this, we want to understand who is out there, who our audience is. So we'd like to have you each take a brief poll, and we'll take a look at the answers together. Right, while people are deciding who they are, for those of you who put in that they qualify as an other, could you unmute yourself and tell us who that other, what that other is? Because that's our primary, majority of our participants are from other. And I would just-
Sure.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Chris Metzler with Middlebury College. I'm in the finance department. I'm the controller at Middlebury College.
Thank you, Chris, for joining. Anyone else care to share?
Hi, I'm Candace with the Vermont Studio Center. I'm the grants manager, and we're a little bit different than a cultural organization, I guess, in a sense. So I chose other for that reason.
That's perfectly legitimate. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so here we are. We have 6 of you, or a quarter of you are in the cultural steward / arts organization workspace. And we have quite a number of emergency managers, and I'm glad you others differentiated yourselves. And then we have an overwhelming number of government entities, both I'm sure from the state as well as the federal government. Okay, I think that's it. There are the results. It's done. Okay. So I just want to give you a brief overview, one slide worth of the Heritage Emergency National Task Force. So we refer to it as HENTF, and it's co-sponsored by FEMA's Office of Environmental Planning and Historic Preservation and the Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative. HENTF is a partnership of more than 60 national service organizations and federal agencies created to protect cultural heritage from the damaging effects of natural disasters and other emergencies. We support, and I underline the word support, state and territorial disaster response and recovery efforts by working with the arts and culture sector. And you can learn more about HENTF at the URL provided in the chat. I'm sure questions are going to arise as you listen to our presenters. So please, again, type them into the chat. Nana will be collecting them, and we'll be fielding as many of the questions as we can in the Q&A segment after both Carl and Tim have spoken. We want to make sure that they can cover the basics before responding to specific questions. But because we have a large number of federal employees, but a smaller number of cultural stewards and arts organizations, people, I hope will be able to answer all of your questions. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to Tim Baker of FEMA to start off. Tim.
Good afternoon, folks. Again, Tim Baker here. I'm going to leave my video off just to save some bandwidth. Welcome to this meeting. The goal of this is to work out what you might need going forward. I'd like to, our goal is to evaluate all of the P&Ps throughout the state, and especially folks such as yourselves, to make sure that we can find a way to get you to eligibility. And that's going to be the biggest part of this, is to first make sure the folks that the organizations that want to look at federal funding for reimbursement are actually eligible to be within the program. And those are the steps that we're going to discuss going forward today. And hopefully it'll answer a lot of your questions, but then Carl and I will be available afterwards to discuss further issues that might arise, further questions you may have, in order to find out how you can qualify to get into both the SBA and the FEMA PA grants program.
Terrific. Thank you, Tim, for that introduction. Now I'm going to turn it over to Carl Donovan of the Small Business Administration.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, like Timothy, I'm going to leave my camera off to save on bandwidth, but I'm with the SBA's Office of Disaster Response and Resilience. We have recently changed our name to reflect more accurately what we do. And if you can go to the next slide, we'll get an idea of the area that is covered by this disaster. The 9 counties in green are the primary counties. So if your private nonprofit is located in one of those counties, we're talking to you. That's exactly who we need to be speaking with. One more, please. Next slide. Help for private nonprofits is delineated by the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000. So it was about 23 years ago that Congress passed the law that said this is the way we have to do it for non-critical private nonprofit services. Now, that is not to say unimportant. It's to say non-critical in the same sense of fire, water, sewer, electric power, and telephones are critical services. These are very important services, so don't be at all put off by the term non-critical. They are, in fact, critical, but at a slightly lower level. Next slide, we'll talk about how we get to this, but let me start out with the exceptions. In real time, the exceptions will probably happen first because they are expenses related to debris removal or emergency measures taken to protect facilities or employees. Those are likely going to happen just at the onset of a disaster. Like, oh my goodness, the water's coming up. We've got to get the collection up to a higher level. We've got to get employees out. We've got to whatever we have to do. Those can be reimbursed by FEMA without regard to whether you get an SBA loan or not. You can go directly to FEMA with those, and then they will have you come back to the U.S. Small Business Administration because in this case particularly, the president has declared a major disaster, and if you provide a non-critical service of a government nature, you must first apply for disaster assistance from the SBA and then exhaust that loan assistance or be declined by SBA before you can seek grant assistance for permanent repairs and replacements from FEMA. Next slide, please. Now, eligibility, as we said at the outset, damaged property has to be in a declared county. We showed you the 9 that are declared. SBA will evaluate an applicant's credit history. I will say that generally going in, we assume that private nonprofit organizations have acceptable credit acceptable to the SBA, although there are some questions in the application about previous federal loans, about bankruptcy, and about pending litigation. If any of those come up, you just need to discuss it with the loan officer. Having a previous federal loan or even an existing federal loan does not preclude you from getting another one as long as things are being handled as they should. And repayment ability is determined by the financial documents that we will ask you to present us and that we will then evaluate. Next slide, please. So what you're going to need, and this is a partial list, there's another slide after this. Articles of incorporation, if of course you're incorporated. If you're not, that doesn't apply. Bylaws, charter, and this fourth one is vital. Doesn't have to be one that you provide at the beginning, but we must have it before we can complete processing and close any loan we offer. A board of directors resolution giving approval to apply to the SBA for a disaster loan. Some organizations have facets in their bylaws that preclude the board of directors from approving that. Most don't, but we will need that before we can close the loan. Then we need complete copies of the organization's most recent nonprofit tax returns or a copy of their tax exempt certificate, and then complete copies of the 3 most recent years' operating results. Next slide, please. Current balance sheet and operating statement dated within 90 days of the application will be necessary, as will the names and addresses of all officers, trustees, and directors. Organizational affiliation, if there is any, if you're an under an umbrella organization, for example, or if you're a chapter of another organization. Then we'll need names, addresses, and phone numbers of all your insurance companies providing coverage at the date of the event, along with policy declaration pages and recovery statements to date, if you have any. And then finally, we'll need specifics of all disaster-related grants and or funds received from FEMA and other sources, because we are prohibited by law from duplicating benefits. That said, if a grant is for something that we don't cover, it's not a duplication. If it is a duplication, we have to reduce the amount we can offer. If it's not, no problem, we just move forward. But we need to evaluate those. And of course, with things like the BGAP being offered by the state, that's something that's completely new to this disaster. We have to take a look at that, and sometimes in some detail. So we'll need the details of those if you've received any. Next slide, please. Now, applicants are encouraged to apply in person. We have 3 business recovery centers around the state. We have, at this point, 5 disaster recovery centers that are open until further notice. Got a couple more that are going to be closing tomorrow and Saturday at the close of business, so we won't burden you with their addresses, but I'll have some addresses later on. Now, although it is a loan, which is in fact a 4-letter word, there's no cost to apply, no origination fees, no points, no closing costs, no prepayment penalties, nor is there any obligation to take a loan if it's offered. It's up to you. It's dependent on your situation and what you judge is necessary. We certainly defer to that. And speaking of deferral, all the loan payments for the first year are deferred interest-free. So you have our money for essentially a full year without incurring any interest. Not only does that reduce your overall cost, it gives you flexibility to investigate what else might be available. And at the end of, let's say, 11 months and 3 weeks, you decide, I think we can recover without it. You pay it back. There's not even any interest to pay. If you decide that you need it, it is indeed another tool in your recovery toolkit. Now, applicants can have an existing disaster loan. If you have one from the 2011 disaster and it's in good standing, that's not a problem. Unfortunately, we can't combine the loans. You can't consolidate them. You'll be making separate payments on the 2. Next slide, please. We have some resource partners that can be of help if you need that. One of the favorite people or groups to refer people to is the SBDC. The Small Business Development Centers are there, and they can help businesses prepare financial statements and even apply for SBA disaster loans. And even beyond this particular function, down the road, they have other things they can help you with, like doing things to help your business stay in business, operational financial marketing plans, alternative sources of revenue, good people to bounce things off of, provide a different perspective perhaps to what you do. And not only do we have the SBDC, we have Women's Business Centers, SCORE, and the Veterans Business Outreach Center, all of which help without a cost. So feel free to reach out to any of those if you don't have the expertise or if you simply want another pair of eyes to take a look at what you're doing. Next slide, please. Filing deadline as of this moment is September 12th of 2023. That is for physical damage. The filing deadline for return applications for economic injury, April 15th of next year. Now, the reason for that is that economic injury often takes longer to manifest. And if it turns out that it is such an injury to you that you're not able to keep your operating expenses current, then we want to hear from you. We want to lend you the money to keep those operating expenses current and keep you in business until things get back to normal. Now,
Hey, Carl, I'm gonna interrupt you right now.
Certainly.
Ben, you have something to add?
Yes, thank you, Lori. I just wanted to slow the roll for 1 minute. I do see one question in the chat, which I think is a clarifying question, which could be addressed. And then I also wanted to do an update on the timelines.
yes, please.
So the question is, a private nonprofit must take or exhaust offered SBA loans before being eligible for any FEMA support, correct? So let's ask Tim that question. Tim, could you answer, please?
I typed it in the chat just to keep things rolling.
Right. So for those of you who are listening in, FEMA will need to see the determination letter from SBA. Loan approved or not, the letter from the final determination of SBA will be required with FEMA to start the consideration of eligibility. So yes, you are correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then the other thing, Carl, I wanted to offer is that you're addressing the filing deadlines, and the current deadline of September 12th is tied to the current deadline for FEMA individual assistance applications. The state of Vermont has submitted a request to FEMA to extend that deadline by 30 days, and we anticipate a positive response to that request within a matter of hours, not days. And provided that that goes through, that will realign the deadline so that the deadline both for the submittal of a FEMA request for public assistance and an SBA application will both be October 12th. We encourage people to apply sooner, but we didn't want people to think that there's a September 12th deadline for SBA looming, because we anticipate that that will be extended by 30 days.
Right, and as you say, don't drag your feet though. If you need to apply, apply. And even if it were September 12th, that's almost 2 weeks. So it's not like you've got to do it by the weekend. But clearly, the sooner the better. I would also go back and amend just a little bit. If the SBA can make you a loan, we will make you an offer. If we could only make you a partial loan because of your financial situation, we would do that and then refer the balance to FEMA. And if we can't make you a loan offer at all, then of course we would decline that and give you the letter. Now, the loans are also pretty flexible. If more funds are needed, applicants can submit supporting documents and request an increase. And there would be perhaps a few reasons for this. If supply and demand kicks in, maybe your service providers find that they can charge more because they're in greater demand. Maybe the supplies are a little bit more expensive because they're in greater demand. So that could result in an increase. They might also find additional damage that would require an increase because we need more repair work. Now, if a lower amount is needed, perhaps your maintenance folks can do things in the normal course of their duties, save you a bit of money there. We can either reduce your loan amount if it's not fully dispersed, or if it is, you can pay us back what you have not used. And of course, we can reduce your loan that way. Now, if a loan request is denied and you decide you really do want the loan and the FEMA grant is not going to be sufficient, or you, for whatever reason, you want to proceed, you do have up to 6 months in which to provide new information and submit a written request for reconsideration. And I will tell you that having done those, they're done by a new loan officer and a new supervisor. So you have two new sets of eyes looking at this. Maybe they'll see something the other party didn't. Perhaps something has changed in your situation. You're able to provide us with new information. Perhaps in the stress of dealing with the disaster, there was something you forgot to provide us. And that all of the above have happened. So we encourage people who are denied to seek reconsideration. We do wind up overturning a fair number of those declines on reconsideration. Next slide, please.
So first of all, Carl, I have two questions. One is mine. What is the difference between a loan for physical damage and one for economic injury?
It's just that they're assessed differently. The interest rates are the same. The terms can be the same. We can go up to 30 years on our term. So it's just assessing the physical damage over here is going to cost X number of dollars to repair or replace. And the economic injury, we're going to need so many dollars to keep our operating expenses current until we can get back to normal. So it's just assessing them a little bit differently.
So does economic injury include loss of income from a loss of revenue?
No, it does not include, it does not replace lost revenue, nor does it replace lost profits. It's sufficient working capital to ensure that you keep your ordinary and necessary operating expenses current, or that you are able to do that.
Okay, and here's the question in the chat. Can you clarify if you must take and use the SBA loan or just get a loan determination letter? Can you get the SBA loan approved and then deny it within the 60-day SBA loan window and still be eligible for FEMA relief?
Tim just answered that question in the chat.
Yes, he did. and the answer is, oh, Tim, do you want to take that? Well, in a sense, he did. He answered it in the chat.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Read it, please, but also.
I don't want to seem too vague, but I'm putting in most likely because it seems like every week something's coming out of headquarters that adds changes to policy due to many factors, and most of them were COVID related, and things have changed and been topsy-turvy. But most likely, I'm 99% sure that you would have to take it just like you would take the insurance money, use it, and then we'll see what the shortfalls would be. And it's, again, ladies and gentlemen, it would be a case-by-case basis. You might have $300,000 of damage to your building. The insurance company may have given you $100,000 and SBA says you're entitled to $50,000. We'll look at the remainder to see where, by deducting off the insurance, the SBA loan, to get you to a final eligible amount. Couldn't say what that amount's going to be. Everything is calculated as we assess the damages and a whole bunch of other aspects of it. It's not always an easy process, and I don't have a quick solid answer for you. I apologize for that, but we want to take our time in the sense that as you fill out the paperwork and you go through these steps, that everything is done accordingly, and then we can address your damages and where they fit in, if they do, if they don't. So there's no good quick answer, and I don't want to make it sound like I can throw one out there. So most likely you would have to take the loan, but it's going to come down to what your financials look like and what SBA feels that you can repay.
Right, exactly. And it's, I agree with Timothy. It's not as simple a process as going to your mortgage lender and saying, I need $450,000 to buy this house. You either qualify or you don't, and you're done. We exist to get you back to where you were pre-disaster. And unfortunately, because of the nature of disaster, and again, as I said, supply and demand, changing prices, and sometimes incurring or finding new damage, it flexes. But we are as flexible as that has to be, as we have to be to help make the adjustments needed as we go through the process. Next slide, please.
And Ben has one more question.
Oh, certainly.
Well, and maybe on the next slide, actually, go ahead. No, okay, so Carl, a new line of query.
Yes.
I'd like to delve a little bit into the terms of SBA loans. Did I read correctly this morning that there is a 12-month period during which loan payments are not due?
That is correct. Our administrator has made that permanent. And what's more is that during that 12 months, interest does not accrue. So you have our use of our money free for a year.
Can you say anything else about loan terms?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for that. I had meant to do that. We have terms up to 30 years, which would actually mean if you're a wonk like I am and you're putting it into your amortization table, it's 348 payments because the first year is deferred. But you can consider that a 30-year loan. We can also go, our loan interest rate for private nonprofits is 2.375%. And if you find that you can pay that off earlier, as I said earlier, there is no prepayment penalty, and there are no points, no closing costs, none of those things that you would associate with a commercial loan, shall we say.
Thank you.
You bet, you bet. And limits, we can go up to $2 million for either physical damage, economic injury, or a combination of the two. And if you have physical damage, it's almost a given that you have an economic injury component. You don't necessarily have to have physical damage to have economic injury. If people are just staying away because they have other things they have to turn their attention to, if you have some concerts that have been canceled because the performers don't want to come into a disaster zone or they simply can't, whatever, and that causes, again, an impact on your ability to stay current on your obligations. Even if you had no physical damage, you can still apply for an economic injury disaster loan. And we strongly encourage people to do that in person at a business recovery center. And we have 3 that are open, Lamoille County in the Ag Building, Washington County at the Vermont Chamber of Commerce, and Windsor County in the Anger and Vocals office. They're open 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, 10 to 2 on Saturdays. They are closed, obviously, Monday being Labor Day and a federal holiday. And if you go to Washington County, the hospital kitty corner across the street has a pretty nice lunch for $4. It's really quite good. Next slide. We have some disaster recovery centers as well. There are 5 that are going to be open until further notice. And they are the 4 in Washington County that you see here: Waterbury Armory, the Berry Auditorium, Vermont College of Fine Arts in Montpelier, and Cabot Town Hall in Cabot. And then in Windham County, the Wardsboro Town Hall. Next slide. And you can go into any of those centers and talk to an SBA professional face-to-face, which we strongly recommend because everybody's situation is different. You have little tweaks that nobody else is going to have, or is unlike anybody has encountered before, or is very specific to you. It's easiest to talk to someone face-to-face. And I had a lady from a university do that. She contacted me Thursday, Tuesday, went into a center, got back to me that afternoon and said they were great. They answered all my questions. They took all the time in the world with me. And the nice thing about those is they're generally no waiting. So you can get in there and talk to somebody. They can also upload any documents for you, so you don't have to try to wrestle with that yourself. They can take care of that. However, we do have other options. You can go to sba.gov/disaster, call our customer service center at 659-2955, or send an email to disastercustomerservice@sba.gov, which actually I did earlier in the week, not as a test, but they got back to me within a couple of hours. They're really quite quick. So feel reassured that we are there for you, and we're going to do whatever we can to help you out. And Timothy, I believe this is where I toss it back to you.
Thank you, Carl. Oh, Carl, we have one more question for you, and then we'll turn it over to Tim.
I'm here.
What is the average turnaround time for an SBA application after it has been submitted?
Well, after we have all the documents, I would say that's the key. I would say 2 to 3 weeks. We're saying 2 to 3 weeks. But again, in some cases, the last document to arrive is the Board of Directors resolution. We have to have that before we can even consider it. There's no point in moving forward until we have that. So once we have all the documentation, we're going with 2 and 3 weeks.
Great, thank you, Carl. And now I'll turn it over to Tim Baker to talk about public assistance.
Hello. As Carl stated, all those little nuanced things that Carl needs, keep those handy after you uploaded them to SBA, because we'll need the same types of documents. Didn't want to burden you by throwing a PowerPoint slide up here with the same information that Carl gave you. So basically, I tried to make this a little bit more, I don't know, streamlined, but just simpler to understand. So your PNP has been affected by a current declared disaster. What do you want to do? So everything that you've done after the disaster, I'm hoping that things have been documented, the efforts that your organization has taken to protect stuff, what your staff was doing, both paid and volunteers, for that phase of the event. What, if you had to sandbag your front door, if you felt that your collections were in danger and you moved them to higher ground or on the second floor, whatever efforts you did during the event to protect the building, protect the contents, I'm hoping that you have some documentation pertaining to that. And then once we've all been there, even me personally, I understand being flooded is never fun. But once you get past that initial phase of what you had to do for the emergency to get stuff protected or out of harm's way, assess your damage, especially if it's a building. Did you lose electric? Did it get into the electrical panels and it short-circuited? You want to have your local codes official inspect the building and make sure it's safe and stable for continued occupancy. Even if you attach a temporary generator to it to get power back in, most of the time you can occupy the building, but your codes official should be the one to give you the green light that everything is safe enough to be back in. Then start looking at your insurance, dig out your policy, dust it off, review everything, and then notify them to start your claim damage. A lot of them have the stipulation in there. If you don't start the claim within a certain number of days, they can deny you outright. So please review your policy. If you have a lawyer that's associated with you or a volunteer, make sure that, not make sure, but if you could ask them to take a peek at it just to make sure everything that the insurance company is telling you works out. I've had I've had instances when I was working closeout that insurance would come across our desk at FEMA and they said, this is all the insurance company would give us. Our insurance people looked through the policy and found a clause where the insurance actually owed the applicant more money. And that had to come first before we could finish the closeout process on the tail end. So it's very important that you understand your policy, get the funding from the insurance company that you're entitled to. Then you may require a licensed engineer or architect to look at the damages and draft an estimate for the repairs, just so that you have something that's certified that we as FEMA can validate and check the boxes that, yes, this is a required repair at this estimate. This is an estimate that's within reason and things of that nature. And then as you're going through that, compile your invoices and expenditures so that your organization can, as you respond to that event, we can keep a running tally as once we get you into the system and everything's nice. I'm expecting everyone to be eligible that applies. let's hope for that. We want those invoices so that my staff can draft the project, get it in for the damages, the scope of work, and the overall cost of it. Do you have a?
Here's
Sorry.
a question for Tim in the chat. Do you have to?
Yeah, I saw it pop up, and then I'm swatting mosquitoes. I've got the windows down in the truck so I can stay somewhat comfortable.
Would you like us to
Let me
read
go.
it to you, Tim?
If you would, please.
Do you have to competitively procure the architect or engineer to get the estimate for repairs?
You have to procure it, but you're going to put it out there. You're going to pick an architect that's going to understand your building and has a reasonable that's licensed in the state and a time frame that's going to work for you. It's a little bit easier on the engineers and architects because they're licensed and they come in knowing what's going on. And
Tim, I think
it's
it's a procurement compliance question.
You have to procure it, but you don't necessarily have to take when we say competitive, it's different than the lowest bidder for your construction repairs. The architect that you would choose, you're going to weigh that out and say, okay, we've put this out for competitive bid. There's 3 architects. You're going to pick the one that's going to be the appropriate for your facility, that they understand it. And we can help you in that sense. I can give you a bid tabulation sheet that allows you to score your contractors. You can do it with your architects and engineers, and as well as your contractors for repair, be they construction or electrical. But
So
yes,
Tim, can I offer a slightly different spin on trying to answer that very difficult and oft asked question?
yes,
Right. Every public assistance applicant is on the hook for complying with 2 CFR federal compliance. For state agencies, that's pretty easy. You follow the state procurement policy. For non-state entities, the first thing to do is follow your own procurement policy, okay? And your own procurement policy may have provisions for exigent or emergency procurement. In other words, there may be a carve-out within your own procurement policy as to what you do on a rainy day or when you're under the gun. If you expect the project to go above $250,000, you absolutely, for permanent repairs, you absolutely must go out to competitive bid. Because $250,000 is a threshold that triggers more procurement review. If you are doing procurement, even if it's for engineering and architecture, that you deem to be exigent, in other words, time is of the essence, then you have the option of abridging your procurement process. Also, under your own procurement policy, you may have the option to do sole source procurement with documentation. You may just need to paper the file saying, our board of directors discussed it, and while we're aware of many contractors, we believe that this engineer or this architect should be the selected one because we've worked with them before, they understand blah, 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 and we find that their proposal is cost reasonable. Love organization. And you hand that to FEMA, and that papers the file with procurement compliance. So there are a couple of different ways to deal with procurement, but one way or another, you can't just ignore it, and FEMA is going to ask the question.
Great, thanks, Ben. Go ahead, Tim.
one moment, please. Little delay here. Give me just a
Tim,
second.
do you
I'm
need
sorry.
any rebuttal on that? Did I misstate on any of that?
No, you're good.
We have another question. Is that sole source procurement process possible even above 250K?
Sole sourcing is, you would have to jump through a lot of hoops for me to consider sole sourcing above that. You would have to be restoring the Mona Lisa and have somebody specializing in that in order to do a sole source. That would have to be very, very, not just important, it would be scrutinized heavily. So, be in your best interest to avoid sole sources whenever possible. Just part of what we're going to be into, ladies and gentlemen, is accessibility. We're looking at a state from top to bottom, east to west, that's got a lot of damage. And we have specialized engineers running all over trying to help out, as well as contractors. So you put that request out there, you might not have as many hits as you think, and it might be easier to choose in the long run because of that. Some of them might just flat out refuse because they're just too busy. So there's a lot of things involved.
Michelle, we see your question in the chat and we'll circle back to that. I want Tim to be sure to be able to get through this before some people might have to drop off.
Yes, and again, I tried to make these PowerPoint slides a little bit more flexible and easier to understand than the typical government bureaucratic speak. So the eligibility for the PNPs, I'm getting a lot of questions. Am I eligible? My answer is maybe. There's a lot of procedures for us to go through, SBA, insurance. There's so many things that we need you to double check. The IRS letters and things of that nature showing that you are not for profit. Do you own the property? Are you leasing it? Are you borrowing it? Is it just you're there free? There's so many things that go forward. So a lot of that, I'm sorry to say, or maybe as for your own benefit, that my colleagues at the SBA will really wring that out for us. They will have a lot of things that are required for you to present to them, financial documents, the property or insurance, and it's so many things that they require that jumpstarts what we would be looking at when it gets to our desk at FEMA. So I just want everyone to understand that there are still some things that we have to consider, but SBA and insurance are your biggest hurdles. Not so much hurdles, but just being able to present that to us, that you've gone through SBA, that you've got your determination letter, you've contacted your insurance company, that you've gotten all the insurance that they're going to give you. You have your IRS letter and all the other little things that SBA is going to require as well. And we can move forward from that. So that's the quick and dirty. So if you want to jump to the next slide, please. So now you've met the initial requirements, how do you apply? And I'm hoping that a lot of you already have your employer identification number. It used to be called a DUNS number, and now they've also moved to the SAMS award management. So there's unique identifiers. I'm hoping that a lot of you already have that. If you don't, we'll work through that as well. Proof that you're legally responsible to repair the facility you're in, or you own or rent something in that situation. And we'll be processing all that to get you and look at it to make you eligible. You're going to apply through the grants portal. That I'm sorry, I missed that on here. I don't think I put a link into the grants portal where you would go and set up that account to start the process. And we will work to get that posted to everyone that's involved in this this meeting. So if you want to jump to the next one, please. I'm trying to hurry this up for you so that you can ask the questions. And I think your questions are probably more important than some of this is at this point. Looking at the work that's eligible.
Tim, I have a question. Is there any trigger for ADA compliance at a certain dollar value for physical repairs on a structure?
I'm getting a lot of feedback. I couldn't quite hear that question.
Tim will have to unmute while you ask the
You
question.
should just speak, you don't have to be here.
Speak.
Yeah. excuse me.
Tim, is there any, because of the dollar value to private nonprofit for physical restorations of a facility, is there a trigger for ADA compliance at some dollar value? Over.
Not a dollar value for compliance. We will, once we look in what the damages are to the building. We would like to see ADA compliance, but if they're in an 1870 historic building, I'm hoping that some modifications that did not alter the building may have been made. If there were steps up to the building, that a ramp that was built over the steps but didn't harm the steps was made to allow for wheelchair access and things of that nature, we would definitely look at the building. It's not so much a cost that would trigger it. We want to make sure that if it is a not-for-profit and the public has access to the building, that it is ADA compliant in that sense, that there's not tripping hazards or anything. But if it's a historic building, we have to look at it differently. And how can any compliance be non-destructive? So
Thank you.
I know it's a tricky question and it's a probably a trickier answer, but when we get into things like private not-for-profit, it is definitely a case-by-case basis. And right now I'm thankful that I think there's less than 20 right now. I'm sure it'll go a little higher, but if we had, 200 PNPs and we had to assess them all, it would take quite a bit of time. I think that we can get through a lot of them for compliance once we understand the damages and the path forward for repair. So, and right now we're looking at making sure that you're, pardon?
All right, so let's keep moving. We're gonna follow up with Michelle afterwards, because we need at least to get through Tim's slide as well, and then we'll follow up.
Yeah, I have no issue of talking afterwards about specific PNPs and things. And even if we don't have time today, we can try to set aside time, or you call me and we'll discuss a few things as you're applying. Biggest thing is getting you into the system. The damages that you have right now will have to be attributed to the July 7th through 17th severe weather event. The facility that was damaged needs to have been in use at the time of the disaster. If it was an auxiliary building that you haven't used for 10 years and it got damaged, that's not something we can really consider unless it was something special. Again, it's going to be a case by case, but most likely it wouldn't be. And it has to occur within the 11 counties designated during this disaster. And as I said before, you have the legal responsibility of your organization at the time of the storms. So that's another quick one. So types of facilities. This comes up quite a bit with some PNPs, a lot of them that if they're a charter school and they're associated with a church or something of that nature, multiple services, how is the building used? Is that building a church on Sunday and it's a senior citizen center Monday through Friday or something of that nature? Multiple facilities. Sometimes you can have facilities in a compound, so to speak, more than one building, but we're going to evaluate each building independently, even if you have 2 or 3 buildings on the same piece of property. And then the mixed use facilities and mixed use spaces. This, comes down to it's a church up front, but it's a daycare center in the back. Houses of worship are handled a little bit differently nowadays. They have been pulled into the fold of FEMA eligibility, but there's still a lot of hoops for them to jump through. So I just want people to understand that there's different aspects when we are looking at the PNPs, the different types of services that are structured. If it's, like I said, if it's a church, but it's also a daycare center, we have to have some delineation between the two. just want to bring that out there for people to think about. Next slide, please. Examples of the eligible costs. This is something I want people to keep in mind. Damaged contents necessary to operation of the private nonprofit facility. Again, if it's a daycare center, you might have had desks and chairs, and maybe if it's a small children, you had mats for them to take naps on if they were damaged. That's the contents that we would be looking at. If it's not permanently nailed to the building itself, that's going to be handled a little bit differently. Debris removal be limited to the grounds of the facility, that eligible facility. So if you get a tree that fell on and it's leaning against the building or damaged the roof, that type of stuff we can take care of. But if it's just out and about, if it's not affecting the building, or it's not affecting a parking lot or something, if it's fallen down in the yard or in the grass and it's not affecting anything, probably won't be able to pay for that. So try to keep some of the things in mind. It's what directly affects your facility and not just the aesthetics of a tree that may have fell in the backyard. Donated resources, that's your volunteers. If you had a situation where you saw the storm coming and you made some phone calls and a bunch of people showed up to help you move contents to the second floor, or they sandbagged the front doors and all of those aspects, those donated resources, I'd like you to keep track of that. If you didn't, if you could call up the people that helped, if they can kind of remember, they might have something on their phone or in their Facebook or one of those things that you can document the time that they spent assisting you. I'd like to capture that. I can't pay you for that, but in the category B for protecting your contents or protecting your building, I can deduct some of that depending on how much you have. We can assign a dollar value to it, and we can deduct that from your non-federal share. So the 75% of the repairs or of what FEMA would pay for, you are on the hook for 25%, having that much effort in the game. Your donated resources, whatever dollar amount that may calculate to, would then be deducted from the dollar amount on that non-fed share. It sounds more complicated than it is. It's something that we can explain to you as we go through your recovery process and doing your paperwork. The permanent repairs on the facility are what we're looking for eligibility. Tree came down, knocked the siding out, wrecked half a wall or something. Those are the permanent repairs that we would be looking for to help you with on the eligibility aspect. Next slide, please. Emergency protective measures. This is a big one for a lot of applicants, regardless if they're a town, a village, or a PNP. It's the emergency repairs, what we call the FEMA blue roofs, where you put a tarp over and get things stable so you keep the rain out of your building and stuff like that. Vacuuming up and cleaning, putting in some HEPA filters to try to purify the air. Depends on what kind of dust, if it knocks something loose. Removal of contaminated gypsum board, your wall board, your insulation, plaster, and stuff of that. Wet carpet, things you've got to get out of there so that it doesn't get mold, so that you can start drying stuff out. Your heating and ventilation system. Sometimes if you have a building like a church that may have been converted, a lot of they have the heat ducts and everything are under the floorboards. And if you have a flood, it's going to get in there. You're going to have to clean that out. You want to make sure we don't get mold in there, mildew, and things of that nature. So there's a lot of that we want to have you look at, be concerned with, so that we can address it, and the costs associated with that. We would consider that the category B, emergency protective measures. Removal or relocation of collectibles to prevent damage or loss. Yeah, that's going to be, but it's going to depend on how you did it. If you did it with volunteers, I can't pay you for your volunteers, but we can capture the donated resources aspect of it. It's safeguarding things the best you can. in as that pending disaster is bearing down on you. Next slide, please. Again, a lot of this comes down to your buildings. The equipment, if your hot water heater and furnace were damaged, that's what we want to look at, minus deductions from insurance or what SBA may have helped you with. The treatment of, I think I heard somebody on here about some of the stuff that was sent to freezer, and we'll be trying to get that restored or cleaned. So yes, those types of collections, we want to make sure that they're handled in that sense and go on a case-by-case basis on how they're going to be cleaned to preserve them. It's hard. I know they're fragile, and it's hard to put a dollar value on some things. When I did Hurricane Irene, the county office that I helped with, the historic courthouse, they had records going back to 1870 in those big leather-bound books that got wet. Some of them were destroyed. Some of them were salvaged and saved. It depends. A lot of it was dependent on where they were at the time. And some of them were so stacked, for so long, they were actually tight that the water didn't really penetrate all the paperwork. It did get around the edges, and it did damage some of the leather, but some of it was actually preserved because they were so permanently stacked together for all those years. They hadn't been touched in quite a few years. So we'll look at all of that going forward, how we can help you or where we can help you. Not sure. I can't say for sure that we can. Some of it, we had to scan the things that were damaged that bad. We scanned, and the books had to be destroyed, unfortunately. So again, here we have stabilization, necessary work. The stabilization, the freezing is the stabilization. The restoration is, sometimes we did some freeze drying and different methods. It's going to depend on the materials that you have that were affected, on how it's stabilized and how it's cleaned, or I don't want to say restored, but mainly cleaned or salvaged to a point. That's salvage is probably not even a good word, but how you get it back so it can be handled, saved, decontaminated. And because it does come down to a reasonable cost, ladies and gentlemen, unless it's something absolutely irreplaceable and it's a national treasure, I'm hoping that it was insured, or at least had something that was on it so that we could get it put back to a usable or viewable condition. But everything's going to come down to a reasonable cost. And so we're trying to get it back to pre-disaster. So if you have something that's 100 years old and it looks 100 years old, we're going to try to put it back to that so it can still be used in that that capacity, but we're not going to put it back to brand new again. We're just got to get it back to what the pre-disaster level was. Now, saying that, there are some avenues that, let's say you had a rare book and it's going to cost $5,000 to get it back to pre-disaster. I'm just pulling a number out of the air. Please don't shoot the messenger at this point. But if it costs $5,000 to get it back to pre-disaster, and your restorer said, well, for another $5,000, we can make this even better, that would be an improved project. And the additional $5,000 would be something that you would have to kick in. We can take it up to that level of pre-disaster conditioning. But if you wanted to make it even better, new threads, new bindings, whatever, and it was another $5,000, that would be an improved project. That would be on your dime. But at least we could help you get it to a point where it could be made better than what it was. It's just, again, it's always going to be a case-by-case basis.
This is Ben. I'm going to jump in with a question again to slow the roll a little bit. Could a library present a humidity control system, for example, as a 406 hazard mitigation project?
I would think so, yes. Again, we want to look at what was damaged, why it was damaged, how it was damaged, and will that help?
So I think that cultural institutions that do end up with public assistance grants should definitely pursue 406 hazard mitigation opportunities to make their collections more resilient.
Oh, most assuredly. Ladies and gentlemen, I will be the first one to tell you that my bosses in the region and at headquarters are adamant about hazard mitigation. How can we keep this from happening again? Can we make this more resilient? And we used to, our aim point used to be 15% of all of our projects. We are now aiming for 40% or better of all of our projects. So hazard mitigation is most definitely on our to-do list. So as we work with you, we will be presenting hazard mitigation aspects and what would be a good word? We're going to pursue hazard mitigation and present it to you above and beyond, because there still is going to be your portion of it that you'll have to also contribute to. The 25% of the hazard mitigation would be on your dime as well. So it's definitely it's a great thing to do, and we're going to do as much as possible, but it's also an expense. So that has to be taken into consideration, but you will be presented with a hazard mitigation proposal to go along with your permanent repair aspects of your facilities going forward.
Okay, Tim, I'm going to ask you Michelle Monroe's question, just in case she needs to leave. What about a library that is a PNP, which is able to use a firm already selected by the municipality? If the municipality went through a competitive process, would that be sufficient? Or if the library is not part of the municipality, even if the library is not part of the municipality?
If they're not part of the municipality, I wouldn't be able to consider that, but we could probably make it a little bit easier. If the municipality has gone out on procurement, if they've already done all the paperwork for the procurement, it's something that we could borrow from them and get it out there into public faster without the library having to make it up all brand new. We would be able to use a lot of the verbiage from the municipality when they put it out for contract, put it out for bid, to save some time.
Okay, then.
So Tim, I think I just heard you say no, that
If they're not part of the municipality, I wouldn't
contract-
be able to piggyback on it in that sense.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, onward.
Examples of ineligible costs. If you're for-profit enterprise, I'm gonna have to, if you're for-profit, I will be kicking your application out, giving you a determination memo in that aspect that if you're for-profit, you're not eligible. We don't cover loss of revenue. I know it's been a big thing, especially in the COVID aspect. When I was doing COVID, the hospital said, well, we're not getting our heart surgeries and our tonsillectomies and things of that nature. I can't help that. That's not something that FEMA, a government agency, can reimburse for. Increased operating expenses. If that one's a little bit harder to explain, but if you were paying $100 a month for your electric and it went up to $125, that's an increased expense I can't help you with. We never really help with that, but I'm just trying to illustrate a quick increased operating expense. We would look at if it's an extraordinary expense, if things were damaged to a degree that you just had to have something and it was an extraordinary expense, we would definitely be looking at that. Again, replacement of rare books and collections. We can get something comparable if your copy of, I don't know, Huck Finn is damaged, we're gonna look on and see what it's gonna cost to replace it. And that, some of the contents would be, in that sense, that vein. The easiest way for me to demonstrate that quick is if a police department was out doing patrol and they had a 2019 patrol car that slid off the road and was swallowed up by the river. I can't buy them a 2023. I have to look at what the value of that 2019 was before it slipped into the river. And that's what we would be looking to put on the cost estimate for replacement. But then if we get into something where they're looking and say, we can't find a 2019, but we found a 2020 that's comparable and within a certain range, we can make that adjustment. But we just can't buy them brand new. We have to have it compatible it's got to be comparable for a replacement. Shelter costs, a lot of that is going to be on the states. They're the ones that are looking, they're working with individual assistance and the sheltering aspect. So that shifts over to the state and hopefully HUD or anybody else on the federal side that could come in and help. Some temporary things, sometimes a church gymnasium or a school gymnasium is used just to get a roof over people's heads for the first few days. But long term, that's not something that we would cover for PNP. The cost share, I just want everybody to understand, it's 75-25. And if you are made eligible and your project is eligible, it's going to be 75% of that. The other 25 will be for you. I always, we always like to think that we can make people whole, but that's just not how the program works. The 75% is, that's locked in, and the 25%, the entire 25% of non-fed share will be on the PNP.
Not true.
So this is just a little quickie. So for everybody, it's about private nonprofits and our reimbursement. It's only for the damages, be it debris, replacement and repairing the facilities during the severe weather of the 7th through the 17th. If something gets damaged, if something was damaged August 14th, it's out of that window, and we won't be able to help you in that aspect. So just wanted to make that clear. We have a window of time that the damages had to occur for the eligibility aspect. I believe that wraps me up, right?
For now, Tim, for now. So we are already at a quarter past the hour, and I understand that many of you have other things that are pressing. So if you're able to stay on and you do have questions, our speakers are still going to be around to answer questions. If not, this webinar recording is going to be made available next week, early next week. We'll have it posted to the Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative YouTube channel, and we will send that link to you. We'll send that link to Ben at VEM and Rachel at VACDaRN, and we will also include the questions and answers that were discussed today, as well as any questions that might appear in the chat that we won't be able to get to, that we will certainly make sure our speakers respond to that. So we'll compile as many questions and answers as we possibly can. That said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Are there other additional questions that anyone would like to pose? I think everyone's been PA'd and SBA'd out. All right, so we will be sure to provide contact information as well. So people who have additional questions that might arise after this, we will be sure to have them. You will get an answer from someone here today. And with that, there are no more questions.
Scroll down to the bottom of the chat.
I think that's the last.
Sorry,
Thank you all.
Sorry, I posted a response, but I sent it to one person instead of everyone. I didn't see it.
Oh, so did you
Okay.
want to repost the?
Yeah, I'm gonna repost it right now.
Is it the link to,
No, it's,
all right,
but
the
something.
suspense is killing us then.
Yeah, it's exciting.
And again, thank you to all of you for sticking with us and for joining us again. Our intent is to try to get you into the door. We'll be sure to include the link to Grants Portal to get you into FEMA public assistance. That deadline is not until October 12th, but while you're working on the SBA application, keep that PA deadline in mind, because as Tim mentioned earlier, much of the information that you would be submitting for an SBA loan will be the same of what's required when you're creating an account for Grants Portal. So with that, I'd like to thank our speakers, and also Tim Baker, Carl Dombeck, Ben Rose, and we will be following up with any other questions with you. And thank you again for coming and participating in this call. And with that, you're free to drop. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.